Welcome to our Paying for College presentation. I'm Candace Powell-Kynard, Financial Aid Consultant and Newcastle County Coordinator for Stand By Me. Stand By Me is a joint project of the state of Delaware and the United Way of Delaware. Our programs are made possible thanks to the support of funders and partners who understand that financial health is vital to the well-being of all Delawareans. For more information about Stand By Me, please visit our website, standbymede.org. Our focus today will be more on federal student aid and the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid used to acquire financial aid. So please be aware also that the presentation will have state funding information focused on the state of Delaware. If you're not a resident of Delaware, then seek out the information from your state by reviewing your state's higher education website. So for details on specific funding from colleges and universities, be sure to visit those college and university websites to get the full details on all the forms and the procedures that are required by those colleges for financial aid and scholarships. So let's get started with our presentation today. So this is what we're going to discuss today. So how much funding is available? What types of funding are available? How do you apply for it? When do you apply for it? And what else is it that you need to know? So how much funding is available? Well, enough to cover the full cost of attendance if needed. And that can come from different types of funding, including merit scholarships, could be loans, could be outside scholarships, and could be also money from the federal government. So we'll talk about those details. So first, let's talk about what the cost of attendance is actually made up of. So we also like to call it the sticker price. So you'll know the word sticker price from kind of being on a car dealership and you're looking for a car, maybe used or a new car, and on the lot you'll see lots of cars, and right on the window is a sticker that has all the details of that particular car and how much it costs and all the other prices that are involved with that car. So sticker price, in this case, you would get that from the college's website. But what are the pieces of the cost of attendance? So the first thing is the tuition. And the tuition is simply the cost of you having a seat in a course or in the class that you're going to take. There are also fees that are a part of cost of attendance, and they can be very low or very high, but they could include things like a fee for the health center or a fee for a computer lab fee, for example. Books and supplies, it's pretty self-explanatory. Books you would have to pay for in college, and supplies could differ very much from one major to the next. So if you're an art major, for example, you would be buying supplies that included paintbrushes or charcoal or clay or things like that. If you're an engineering major, you might have to focus on purchasing software or maybe even a particular computer device. Room and board is exactly that. You're going to have a room if you live on campus. Now, board is kind of a old-fashioned word for all of the costs that are associated with living on campus. So primarily your meals are probably the biggest cost. So meal plans vary widely, even within the same school, but they definitely vary widely from one school to the next. Now, transportation is something that a lot of families forget to put into their budget, but it's really important that you consider the costs of transportation. Transportation, even if you're going to school locally, you know, that could include gas fare for driving or bus fare if you're going to jump on the bus. But you do have to really focus on the cost of transportation if you're going further away from home. So planes, trains, and automobiles to get you there. Colleges also, you have to consider that colleges close during a variety of different breaks and holidays. And so you'll have to figure out how to get wherever you're going during those breaks and during those holidays. And that could very well be a cost for transportation as well. So clothing is a part of your cost. It's legal, but interestingly, it can also be covered by financial aid, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. Miscellaneous personal expenses include your own expenses. For example, eyeglasses or contacts or medication that you may have to take, your general day-to-day needs like toothpaste and a toothbrush and soap and shampoo. So these are the same costs that you would have at home that you're going to have to also figure out once you're living on campus in particular. So now keep in mind, there are no, say, agencies or government entities that tell colleges how to price themselves. So the colleges are calculating their own costs. Typically, the financial aid office is involved in helping to do that. They vary widely from one school to the next, one area to the next. They could also vary depending on what you're going to study. The cost includes all the tuitions, the fees, and the allowed living expenses for the whole academic year. And each academic year is separate and costs could go up from one year to the next. Keeping in mind, financial aid cannot exceed the cost of attendance. And so you're never going to be in a situation where the college gives you more than what it costs to go there. So that's what it means, like it cannot exceed. So let's really talk about what the cost is, and let's break that down a little bit. And so this information is based on some really interesting research that wanted to show parents what the real cost of college was. And so you look at that cost of attendance, or what we call the sticker price, and you subtract from that the scholarships and the grants, the free money that are available to students. And what you get is the net cost. So why this is important to know is the fact that scholarships and grants, and particularly scholarships, are very available, right? And because of the availability of scholarships and grants, it is more unlikely that a family is really going to pay that sticker price, if you will. So that price that you see on the website, it's not likely that most families actually pay that. What they actually pay is the net cost. And again, that's from the availability of scholarships and grants. So you would more likely be paying that net cost. Okay, so let's take a look at the types of funding that are available. And the first thing that I want you to think about is the sources of aid. And I like to call them the pots of gold. So the largest pot of gold comes from the college itself, right? So they are giving out the largest amount of money to students. The next biggest pot of gold is the federal government through federal student aid, and the amount that they're giving out is definitely in the billions. The third pot of gold is from the state itself. And in this case, we're going to be talking about Delaware. And then the fourth pot of gold are what we call private or outside scholarships. These would be the scholarships that you could get from different organizations by looking online or from your school counselor. And they're called outside because they would be scholarships that are given not by the college, but by an outside agency. So let's kind of break those sources down even further and talk about scholarships, grants, work study, and loans. So scholarships and grants are free money, meaning that you do not have to pay them back like you would a loan. This is free money that you do not have to pay back. So the key to scholarships is finding out how and when to apply and absolutely following the instructions, right? Making sure that you're paying attention to not only the eligibility requirements, the instructions, but also the deadlines. Keeping in mind that there are need-based scholarships that require that you use the FAFSA application, the free application for federal student aid, for example, and we'll get into the details of that later. But that could potentially be a requirement to acquire those scholarships. How well you do in high school definitely can impact your ability to get scholarships in particular. And while all scholarships do not require a GPA, The higher your GPA and the more rigorous your course load is from high school can be a big help, because then you can apply for both types of scholarships. Make sure that you're following instructions and make sure that you really understand what's being asked of you, what's required to both keep the scholarship, but also get the scholarship or renew the scholarship in a future year. So renewable scholarships are available, and it means that you would get the scholarship award in the first year, and then as long as you follow the requirements and the instructions, you could very well keep or get the or renew that scholarship in future years. So the second year, and maybe even on past the second year. Renewable scholarships do come with requirements. So it's possible that the requirement is that you study in a particular major, or that you have and keep a certain grade point average from one year to the next, or possibly even one semester to the next. So you really do need to read the fine print. All right, so federal work study is exactly that. You are working while studying. Typically, you're working part-time. Typically, it is minimum wage. In the first couple of years of college, you're not given a lot of hours to work, because they do understand that you are in college to study, not to have a long hour job, but to actually attend class and study. So in the freshman year, it is typically less than 15, typically 10 hours a week, and maybe a little more as you go up in years. But again, it's minimum wage. It's truly a part-time job, and more often than not, those jobs really are on campus. So one of the things that you do have to be cognizant of and really understand is that you want jobs that don't interrupt what you're doing when you're studying, right? But federal student aid provides work-study opportunities for students, and this is where you make your own money through a paycheck that you then keep, and then you spend however you'd like to spend it. So if it's pizza money on the weekends, or paying something that you'd like to pay for. A real misunderstanding, however, is that, work study, you have to pay your bills. You're not required to pay college tuition or room and board bills with your work study money. That work study money is what you keep. And this is also because you are earning some money. This is also how you are able to cover some of your own costs of clothing, as well as some of your miscellaneous personal expenses. So let's talk a little bit about loans. And as you likely know, loans are money that you borrow, but then you must pay them back plus interest when you're finished with school. Loans should be used to fill a gap, right? They should not be the first money in, as we say. They should not be the first money that you go to look for when you want to pay for school. You really should be looking for all the free money, the money that you don't have to pay back, and acquire as much of that as you possibly can, and then use a loan to cover a small gap in any of that funding. Now, we recommend that you borrow federal loans first. Federal loans have a very flexible repayment system that is not necessarily always available in private or bank loans, or any loans that aren't federal. So if you focus on federal loans first, you're putting yourself in a position to have a lot more flexibility when it's time to pay back those loans. And so again, borrow the very bare minimum that you really need in order to cover your gap, or to close that gap. So here's kind of a summary of what the federal programs are, the real significant federal aid programs. So let's start with the grants. The grants include the Pell Grant. Again, grants do not have to be paid back. It also includes the Federal Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant, which, because that's a mouthful, most people just say SEOG, or sometimes you'll hear SEOG. But once again, that's a grant for high need students and grants you do not pay back. The TEACH grant, the Teacher Education Assistance for College and Higher Education grant, is for students who have an interest in education and teaching. There is some focus on becoming a teacher in a high need area, and also becoming a teacher of underserved populations, and then specific to teaching STEM careers, so teaching math and science, which are always in need. Federal student aid also includes employment, which we talked about, which is the Federal Work Study Program, and loans. So the loans that are in the student's name include the direct subsidized loan. And subsidized, think of subsidy, where that loan's interest is being covered for the student while they are in college, as opposed to the direct unsubsidized loan, which, if you think about it this way, the unsubsidized loans interest is not being covered for you while you're in college. You are responsible for covering that or paying that interest while in college. So unsubsidized begins with the letter U. That's how you can determine that you are covering that interest. You can actually ask for the loan to be what they call capitalized, so that you're not covering the interest while in college, but keep in mind that interest continues to build or accrue. Parents also have access to a loan in the Parent Plus Loan program, and this is where the parent borrows on behalf of the student. So the parent is borrowing a plus loan. The plus loan is credit worthy. So that is a part of the awarding process. The loan also, once it's dispersed, parents then begin making payments on that loan approximately 3 months after the loan has been dispersed to the college. Now, again, you can ask to not make those payments right away, but keep in mind the interest continues to build. So here's some information about the state of Delaware and the way in which the state helps students to pay for college. And so the first very popular program is the SEED Scholarship. And the SEED Scholarship simply can help a student pay for their tuition for 2 full years. So the student could have their entire tuition covered for 2 full years. Now, in high school, in order to be eligible, the student must have a 2.5 grade point average, and they must not have any trouble with any felonies or the law. They do have to be a Delaware resident, but if you have at least a 2.5 GPA, that's one of the main requirements for getting the SEED Scholarship. Now, where do you use the SEED Scholarship? The SEED Scholarship can be used at Delaware Technical Community College for an associate's degree there, or an associate's degree or the Associate in Art program, Associates in Arts program from the University of Delaware. So not main campus, but their Associate in Arts program. So either one of those institutions will accept the SEED Scholarship, and you can, as long as you keep your grade point average up, you can maintain that scholarship for 2 full years. So you maintain it for the 2nd year. Now, the Inspire Scholarship is another great opportunity, and this is a scholarship that is given to students who are interested in Delaware State University. Delaware State University requires that students have at least a 2.75 GPA. They have to be Delaware residents. You have to go to Delaware State University, and then you could be eligible for additional money once you're there, as long as you keep your GPA up. Now, the Memorial Scholarships and the Diamond State Scholarships are scholarships given by the state of Delaware. They are considered merit-based scholarships because they will require that the student be meritorious, right? So there's a certain GPA, usually a 3.0 or higher, and the potential exists also that they may ask to see standardized test scores, including the SAT or the ACT. That could be part of the part of the process. The scholarship incentive program, or what we call SKIP, because again, that's a mouthful, that's a need-based program, and students would apply using the FAFSA application to indicate their interest in that in the state. So the state would see that you've applied using the FAFSA application. They would review to see whether or not you're eligible. It is need-based, so students who have high need would be likely to get the SKIP grant. All right, so how do you go about this process for money from the state of Delaware? You do need to complete the FAFSA application, and it does have to be submitted before or by April 15th. And in this case, we're talking about April 15th of this year. Typically, it is April 15th of every year. In order for the state to be in contact with you, they do ask that you create a student account. It's a very quick process. It doesn't take a long time to fill out that brief application. And you would go to the state's website, DelawareStudentSuccess.org. And once you're in the state area, you will see that you can create your own account. And this is how the state is able to stay in contact with you about the various funding programs that they have. There is a common application for the memorial and the state scholarships. You'll also find those on DelawareStudentSuccess.org. And then you'll have to also meet any of the requirements for each individual school. So who's actually eligible for federal student aid? Well, you must be a citizen. You have to be pursuing a degree. Eventually, you have to graduate from high school. And at least for this year, students who are born male will have to register with Selective Service. Selective Service is basically emergency military service, if you will. If this country, the United States, got into an emergency situation and they needed additional help outside of who's already in the military, then they could call upon those who are registered for Selective Service. Again, this is just for young people who were born male. Now, if you are undocumented, you do not have a U.S. citizenship, then you could be an undocumented student who you will not qualify for federal student aid, but that doesn't mean that you couldn't get other aid to attend college or other help to pay for college. And so you may not get the federal student aid because of your citizenship, but you could, for example, benefit from the Dream US scholarship, which also Delaware State University is a host of that scholarship program. You could get the SEED scholarship to go to Delaware Technical and Community College. So while you won't be eligible for federal student aid, there are other opportunities to help you pay for college, and the college itself could be a very helpful resource. All right, so how do you apply for this federal student aid that we keep talking about? So at minimum, you will need to apply to go to college, and then you will complete the free application for federal student aid. Now, you do not, however, have to apply for admission to a college or university before you start the FAFSA application. You will, however, eventually need to apply and be admitted for that particular school to award you any monies that you're eligible to receive. So you don't have to apply before you get to the FAFSA, but eventually the process has to be complete. You do have to be admitted, and then that's how you will be awarded financial aid. So this is what the homepage looks like for studentaid.gov. And this is all things federal student aid. And this is where you'll start to complete your FAFSA. So the journey begins with FAFSA. All things are around this form. It is free to complete. There is no need, no requirement that you pay an application fee. It is a free application. Studentaid.gov is actually where you access the FAFSA application. And the FAFSA comes out every year starting October 1st. You are completing it in the final year of high school, or what would be considered the senior year of high school. So you're not completing this prior to that. You're going to start October 1st of the senior year. For this year, students are using their 2019 income, but generally speaking, you'll complete the FAFSA for the fall after high school, and you'll use the income from 2 years prior to that. All right, so the FAFSA can be somewhat complex and somewhat confusing, because what does it do? Who are they? Are they people? What is the FAFSA? So the FAFSA does determine the student's eligibility for federal student aid. It gathers all of their particular family assets and income information that is needed to make a decision, and you have to submit it every year. But it is not sort of an office filled with people that make decisions. It's really an application, right? It's a tool that colleges and universities and possibly others are using to help them make the decision based on the student and their family's income and assets. But the form itself does not collect information on household expenses or special circumstances. You can't write an essay in the FAFSA application. It doesn't determine what specific aid will be awarded, and it doesn't determine how much aid will be awarded. And it is not a loan application. So the human beings in the financial aid office actually make that determination of how much and which types of aid will be awarded. Now, the expected family contribution, or EFC, most of the time you'll hear EFC. It really is one of the results of completing the FAFSA application. So it's the amount that the government estimates that students and parents would be able to contribute, right? Family contribution. You wouldn't really look at it as a dollar amount that you would have to pay, but it's how the college uses that number to calculate on their own what a student's need is, right? So it's helping to determine the eligibility for need, and then in like kind, the student's eligibility for need-based aid. So that's how the EFC is used. It's used more of a way to help determine what that student's need is. So just as a quick wrap up, we look at completing the FAFSA, and here is the whole journey, right? So you start off at the studentaid.gov website. You click on apply for aid. You'll find it says complete the FAFSA form. You'll click on that. And then if you are new, then you'll see something that says start here. If you're a returning student or you need to log back into the FAFSA, then you'll click on log in, which is underneath returning user. You'll get to a welcome screen, and for this year's seniors, you will be selecting the 2021-2022 FAFSA. However, in the senior year, if you're looking to go to college the fall after your senior year, then you would be looking at the date of the fall in which you would begin, or which you would like to begin. You want to complete all the sections for the online FAFSA, and then you're going to sign it electronically with your FSA ID. And then once you complete it, we do recommend that you stay organized and you keep all of your information together, whether you're going to print it out and put it in a folder or establish a folder on your device or your computer. So helpful hints to completing the FAFSA. One of the really helpful tools that's available right now is called the data retrieval tool. And the data retrieval tool allows a student and their parent to approve that the IRS send tax information and then transfer it over into the FAFSA. It is not a long process at all, and it can be extremely helpful. One, it will cut down on you manually having to enter tax information into the FAFSA application. And then also the colleges consider the transfer process from the IRS to be a trusted source of information. Keep in mind that once again, for this year's high school students, you would be using the 2019 tax and income and asset information. But keep in mind, if you think about when you're actually going to be starting college, whether fall or spring, keep in mind that you'll be using the income and asset information from 2 years prior to that point. Here's some very helpful information on where you can get additional assistance. So the U.S. Department of Education has their 1-800-4FED-AID number, which is basically a customer service line. You can call and ask questions about completing the FAFSA, as well as creating your username and password, also called the FSA ID. And we're about to talk about that next. You can also call the 800 number for Stand By Me to get additional information. So after completing the FAFSA, one of the results is your student aid report. And I kind of like to call this the carbon copy of everything that you said and answered. So the student aid report allows you to check all the information for accuracy. It allows you to make updates and changes if necessary. You could very well add a school if you wanted to. But it gives you all the questions that are part of the FAFSA application, and it gives all the answers that you provided. So it allows you to double check as well as make updates and corrections. So let's get more specific about parents and the FAFSA. So there are 2 designations that come from when you are applying for federal student aid. So if you are dependent on your parents for financial support, then you would be a dependent student. If the FAFSA form determines that you are not dependent on anyone else or your parents for your financial support, you would be considered an independent student. So what does this look like? So if a student is independent, then all of these bullet points here would indicate that this student would have some independent status. So if you qualified for any of these bullet points, if you're 24 or older, if you're married, if you have your own children, if you've experienced homelessness or had experience the foster care system, that the possibility exists that you could be an independent student and that you would only use your information and your income information on the FAFSA form to help make a determination as to your eligibility for federal student aid. So if you are going to put parents on the form, then which parents do you actually put on the FAFSA form? So the parents that you are including on the FAFSA form would be the legal parent, and the legal parent is defined as someone who is the biological or adoptive parent with whom the student lives for the majority of the year, right? Now, as much as we might love our grandparents, our aunts, uncles, and cousins, for the point of the FAFSA and federal student aid, grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, foster parents are not considered the legal parent, and they would not be expected to put their income and asset information on the FAFSA. So if you are living at home with someone who is not your biological or adoptive parent, then it's highly likely that you will only be adding your information, your income and assets to the FAFSA application. Now, do both parents have to be on the form, or is it just one parent? So if parents are living together, right, if the legal parents, biological or adoptive parents are living together, then both of those parents have to place their information, their income and assets on the FAFSA application. If they're not living together, then the custodial parent, or the parent with whom the student has lived for the majority of the year, that's the parent that would add their information, income and assets to the FAFSA application. So, and if legal parents are divorced and custodial parent has remarried, then the information also must be provided by the step parent. So if the student is at home with their biological parent and the biological parent or adoptive parent has remarried, then that union plus the student's information would go on the FAFSA application. We usually get a lot of questions about that. So now, what if a student does not live with legal parents or cannot obtain the information from them? So maybe the student doesn't really know the whereabouts of their parent. In this country, we have a lot of different scenarios of how families are put together. And maybe the parent just hasn't permitted or they haven't been in contact with the student. So what does the student do in that case? Well, in that case, the student could very well have what we call a special circumstance. So that special circumstance could exist based on a couple of those scenarios. And it's really best that the student be in contact with the financial aid office, because each financial aid office has staff that can help the student figure out the best possible situation for them and whether or not they would be eligible for student aid and how they would be eligible for the student aid. So through professional judgment, which is a phrase that the financial aid offices use, they could determine, for example, that the student does have an extenuating circumstance and that they could override or do a dependency override on the student. So the student could benefit from aid, though their circumstance doesn't match closely with the eligibility requirements. So the financial aid office could help them through that process. All right, now to start the whole thing off, you do have to have an account with Federal Student Aid. So you've got to develop a username and password, which is called the FSA ID, Federal Student Aid ID. So your ID is how you are logging in and out of the FAFSA if you are a student. So you create an account, you set up your username and password, and that's right on the studentaid.gov website. Now, the student also, the parent who's living with the student should also create an FSA ID. They should create their own username and password with information that's completely separate from the student. Now, the parent will use their username and password to sign the student's application at the end. So in support of the student's application, the parent is also signing off at the end. And quite frankly, the data retrieval tool is the other area that parent and student could use their FSA ID to access that information and approve the IRS to send their information into the FAFSA. So it's important that the student have their username and password, and that at least one parent in the household also create a username and password so that they can sign it at the end. So when do you actually apply? Well, we don't require, or excuse me, we don't recommend that you wait for this process. You want to apply as soon as you can, as soon as you've made the decision to go off to college, and as soon as possible after the October 1st opening start time. And so you do not wait until you've been admitted. You don't even have to wait until you've applied. You can create the username and password right away, and then start completing that FAFSA application right away, anytime after October 1st of any given year. So now, how will you know how much money you're going to get, right? So how will you know what financial aid you're eligible to receive? Well, the financial aid office at the college will notify you. And it's very possible that you could get multiple notifications from different colleges to which you've been admitted, right? So you've applied, you've gotten accepted, and then once you're accepted, the admissions office will notify the financial aid office, and they'll say, hey, it's time to start processing them for financial aid. And then you'll get notified. Typically, you'll get notified by email. They will give you any instructions that you need to open up, say, their web portal, or what I kind of describe as the college's dashboard, that each student will have kind of a dashboard that they'll be able to see all of their information and notification. You will still see that there are colleges and universities who are sending their financial aid awards notifications to students in the mail. So sometimes you will get it in the mail. Typically, you'll get an email that will kind of alert you to something and where to access it or where to go for additional information. At this point, again, you'll have been admitted and you'll have already completed the FAFSA and any other follow-up paperwork that the college requires. All right. So the scholarships information, again, I want you to go to the Delaware studentsuccess.org scholarship. That previous screen was that showed a survey, which we're not going to address today, but you should spend some time really looking at the Delaware studentsuccess.org website. If you are a Delaware resident, then everything you want to know about going to college and obtaining financial aid and scholarships really is in that website. And so once again, I just want to encourage you to get everything done on time, do your research, better understand how the colleges work, what they're going to require you to do. While the FAFSA application is one of the largest steps that you're going to have to take, there are other requirements, and there could potentially be other forms that you would have to complete. There are colleges across the country, about 400 of them, that require the CSS profile. You can find more information about that on the College Board, but just know that the FAFSA is really one of the first steps, but it's not the only step that you'll need for college. And once again, this is a presentation given to you by Stand By Me. Any information, follow-up, or questions that you have, please visit our website again, which is standbymede.org. And again, my name is Candace Powell-Kynard. It's been a pleasure. Reach out to us if you have some questions. Thank you.